This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
Call this meeting of the Eau Claire City Council to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson. Beaton.
Here.
Berge. Christofferson.
Here.
Emmanuel.
Here.
Gregert.
Here.
Strobel.
Here.
Weld.
Here.
Worthman.
Here.
Jean.
Here.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk, and welcome everyone to this Monday, January 7th meeting of the Eau Claire City Council. I thank everyone who had a chance to come down this evening and let folks know that if you're not able to be here, that these proceedings are simulcast on valleymediaworks.org on the government channel. It's 99.4 on Charter Cable. Also on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM. During its Monday City Council meetings, the Eau Claire City Council holds public hearings, listening sessions, and public discussions which give residents the opportunity to weigh in on the important decisions that we make at our legislative meetings on Tuesday evenings starting at 4 p.m. I'm just going to briefly talk about the procedures if you would like to come forth and say something regarding any of the items we're discussing tonight. Once I introduce an item, staff, or in some cases the council, will present on that item, and following that, council members may have clarifying questions that they ask just to gain greater understanding of that item. Then we open for public input. If you could please approach the podium at that time, and when you approach, please share your name and your address, and hold your comments to 5 minutes. You'll see there's a light here at the front that starts at green and moves to yellow and to red. At the end of 5 minutes, your time is up, and if you go past, I can kind of remind you to wrap up your comments. There's also another opportunity that we try to make available for folks who come if they don't want to address any of the items specifically here on the agenda. We have a public comment period at the end of the meeting, and if you're interested in speaking during that, please sign up on the booklet at the back of the room, and then we will call you forward. If you don't have a chance or would rather not speak here this evening, you can still fill out a comment form at the back of the room. We get those as council members, and they help us going into tomorrow's meeting. The other thing is that you can contact us through our email or through our phone. All of that information is listed on our city website. With that introduction, I want to again welcome everyone to City Council this evening, and we will get started on our first order of business. This is a public discussion, item number 1 on McDonough Park. This discussion is regarding McDonough Park active aging design proposal. Mr. Todd Koala will present this evening. Good evening.
If the autofocus works, we'll be in real good shape. If not, I'll panic.
Looks good.
Good evening, everyone. Before you in your packet is a design proposal for McDonough Park. Some years back, we were approached by the Chippewa Valley Pickleball Club to have pickle courts installed in McDonough Park at about the time that our former tennis courts we need to make a decision to either raise them or move along. And as it turns out, the pickleball club raised a considerable amount of funds to construct six pickleball courts, or turn that tennis court into pickleball courts. Once the sport of pickleball was introduced into the space, it gained quite a bit of popularity, and a year and a half later, there was an addition of 6 more pickle courts. And again, the use and popularity of the particular park has increased significantly. Since then, the pickleball club has entered into an agreement with the Parks and Rec Department to improve the roadway leading into the park and increase parking stalls as well. The Chippewa Valley Pickleball Club was actually a group that was fairly instrumental in gathering momentum for this idea of active aging in McDonough Park. After some conversations with the folks interested in these amenities, we realized that, we have neighborhood parks, and we cater very well, in our opinion, to youth and younger folks with playgrounds and actually even a fitness zone in Owen Park with fairly high impact fitness equipment. But we really seem to be lacking, if you will, in some amenities that focus on a different demographic of actually for folks of all ages, but the demographic of our aging population as well, and in trying to encourage those folks to get out and utilize our space. So we had gathered some ideas from the pickleball club themselves and folks interested in active aging in the community. We met with the McDonough Park neighborhood in September to get their input, and we've consulted with CBS Squared out of Chippewa Falls to help us with a design proposal. And a couple of things that I'd like to point out in this design proposal is the area to the west, the far west, is generally they want to leave that sort of off limits from further development. There's a lot of mature trees in that space, more of a passive area there, picnic tables possibly, and a picnic grill, something like that. The neighborhood and the folks, the user group, wanted to focus on more of a plaza area as a social gathering point. The play equipment is still sited here. Our sport court here is due for replacement very soon, and we would be shifting that over towards the pickleball courts. The playground is still represented. Here's the 12 pickleball courts. And what's unique about this design too is there's a series of trail loops where someone wanting to take a measured circuit walk would be able to utilize this trail system. And you'll also notice that some of the areas that are marked here above Dell's Pond, we certainly wanted to open up these view sheds or vistas into the Dell's Pond. That being consistent with the current Waterways and Park plan, as well as the trail along the spine of the ridge line here. This ultimately would represent a connection between the High Bridge to the west and the Western Avenue, Star Avenue Trail corridor as well. And that's cited in our bike and pedestrian plan and our park and open space plan as well. If any of you have any questions specifically about this design, I'd be happy to entertain those to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Mr. Koala. Is there any questions from City Council at this time? Councilmember Graggart.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman, and thank you, Mr. Koala, for your presentation and work on this. The trail, is that intended to be like a 12-foot trail?
Yes.
Okay.
Currently, our standard for our recreational trail, if we can at all achieve that, is typically a 12-foot wide multi-use trail system that would accommodate bicyclists, pedestrians, and parents with strollers as well.
Okay. I have a follow-up question. I guess I was wondering some of the uses on the eastern end, if you could explain a little bit more.
Oh.
I see a relatively large parking lot that gets pretty close to the large trail and the water. So I guess I'm wondering what the use of that particular lot is.
This parking lot?
Yeah.
When pickleball is in session, this park is pretty well full. And the parking lot here on the west end is undersized. We do have some parking planned along the linear roadway here. And this parking lot here is to accommodate an additional 2 dozen or 24 24 vehicles. The drawing, on this drawing, it looks a little tight, but there's a considerable amount of green space between the north edge of that parking lot and that proposed trail.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Graggart. Mr. Koala, I just wanted to ask a follow-up, and I apologize. I feel like I might have asked this before, but the user agreement that will go along with this, we don't have that coming to council, correct?
In theory, the agreement is one that we previously worked with the pickleball club.
Okay.
That the active aging idea or ideal was mentioned in that former.
Okay, so this is an addition to that. That's the agreement that we're going by.
Yeah, this design proposal sort of fleshes out the detail of that
Okay.
language in that agreement.
And then a follow-up, what's the timeline for this whole thing?
Funding, obviously, is going to be a big part of that burden would be on the Chippewa Valley Pickleball Club. And as funds become available and on deposit in the Community Parks Association, we would begin construction. We, to date, we have secured the Hometown Health Grant from Mayo Clinic Health Systems, and a meeting recently with the Department of Natural Resources Grants Administrator tells us that virtually all this project would be grant eligible with matching funds as well. So we'll work together with the Chippewa Valley Pickleball Club to get set up for funding this. And the timeline would obviously be phases, and it would fit somewhere into our 5-year capital improvement plan.
Thank you. Councilmember Beaton?
Thank you. When this came before the Parks and Waterways Committee, there was some concern about whether there was enough parking, especially on large events for the pickleball court. There was some concern about whether there would be enough parking for their annual tournament. And I understand that there's a railway right to the south of the park there that any pedestrians can't cross. They have to enter with their car and then park their car, otherwise walk all the way around. In the time between then at the Parks and Waterways meeting and now, I've been trying to think of any sort of way that we could solve that. Is there has staff ever looked at any options for any sort of pedestrian walkway agreement with the railway companies?
That was discussed, and when the pickleball courts were first developed, there was a lot of interest in using the pickleball courts, and users were parking in the neighborhood streets. Center Street is the entry into the park. Spring Street, and McDonough Street were at capacity. The neighborhood wasn't real thrilled with that, and the railroad was even less than thrilled with that. They actually had railroad folks issue warnings to people that were seen crossing the tracks, and short of the planets lining up, I don't believe we'd ever get another permission for another crossing at that particular location.
Okay.
Parking, we did discuss, you're right, at the Waterways and Parks Commission meeting, but there's the conceptual drawing showing trees planted here. What we would make sure we do is we hold back any planting not to encroach that parking lot, so we could, in periodic times of their annual tournament where they expect a lot of use, we would have room for overflow parking on the grassy spaces. So I think we can accommodate that very well. If this concept really continues to grow and blossom, we may need to look at another park in our system to engage with the active aging demographic, because we may have very well reached carrying capacity in this park at some future date, which would be a good thing.
Thank you. Councilmember Emanuel?
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. Thank you, Mr. Koala, and also thank you to the citizens who have worked their tails off to raise the money and keep this vision alive. So it's a really exciting project. Do you know if there's been any discussion around utilization of the city neighborhood matching grant dollars, since there are external dollars
Yes.
here?
Yep, they work that angle as well.
Can you speak a little bit more about that?
The neighborhood matching grant is a fund, I believe, that is managed out of the planning department, and it's a $5,000 max. I do know that we've worked with the planning department before on a number of grants with the neighborhood matching funds, and very successful. And I think this would score rather well with them, as a matter of fact. I do have a meeting planned with later this week with Keith Jonathan from Housing, due to the fact that this particular park is in a low to middle income qualifying neighborhood. I would suspect there might be some more grant opportunities to go into these amenities as well. I'll know more later this week.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Further questions? Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. Mr. Qualla, I was wondering, I guess building off of some questions about the bike and pedestrian access to the park, I see that Center Street only has a sidewalk on the east side of the road, and the trail seems to be coming from the west side of Center Street. So I guess I was wondering if there's a plan to add sidewalk or a trail onto Center Street south of the railroad crossing, and also just how are we going to improve the railroad crossing as part of this project?
The railroad crossing itself on Center Street is the crossing that's been there historically for quite some time. If increased, it qualifies as the standard. If there's any improvements that we could do, or our traffic engineer recommends, or even the railroad, if we see increased usage there, we certainly take that under advisement and add improvements as well. Sidewalks on Center Street, that would be a discussion item with the Public Works or Engineering Department.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of, seems like someone would have to walk on the street itself as it is right now, and but I'm assuming we can find a way to improve that with the engineering folks, so thank you.
I'm pretty sure we could.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there further questions or comments or ideas regarding this presentation? I don't see any. Thank you, Mr. Qualla.
Thank you. I'll leave this up here.
Okay,
if that's all right.
great. Thank you. Then are there members of the public that are here this evening who would like to address this item? Welcome. Good evening.
Hey there. I'm Marilyn Scrivseth. My address is 3350 Whispering Pines Lane. And I can't tell you how excited I am for this project. We are so behind the times not having an active aging park in Eau Claire. Just think about all the seniors we have that all they do is they go to our parks now with their cell phones and text while their kids are playing, or they're in the stands watching other people play. If you go to Europe, you'll find these active aging parks everywhere, and they're meant to help people maintain their independence and their living skills well past what they're doing now. So it's a focus on low-impact activities that anybody can do. They don't cost anything, and they help maintain their overall health and well-being. The pickleball courts are the perfect example. Okay, on the pickleball courts, believe it or not, we fill that with 24 people playing, as many as 20 to 30 people watching, waiting to play. So do we need more parking? You bet. That's why the pickleball club agreed to put in those extra parking lots. A couple things on it. Functional fitness is a big thing. If you think about pickleball, in order to stay healthy, that you have to worry about fall prevention. Pickleball, going to get the ball, the first step, both help with fall preventions. When you play pickleball, you change teams up every time you finish a game, so you get to meet new people. We have a number of folks that lost their spouses this last year and would have been lost had they not had pickleball, because 90% of the pickleball players come by themselves. And it's a chance for them to meet people, to get socialized, and now we've got a group that actually just went down to the Florida Villages all together to keep playing pickleball. The walking trails are also a key component. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who are seniors that they love our bike trails, but they don't feel safe. And it's not that they don't feel safe, that they're afraid someone will assault them. They don't feel safe because they might have a medical event and no one will see them. And so having short circular walking trails in there where they can have short bouts of walking and people can see if something happens, they might have go into AFib or have some other issue. They feel a much safer walking there when they have people to observe them. Think about if you're an adult that is taking care of someone who has early onset dementia. You aren't going to let them just go outside and play anywhere. You're going to take them here where they can be watching them and all the activities they can do. So a couple key activities, you're talking about the pickleball courts, you're talking about bocce ball, where bocce ball you can remove the end rails and people that use walkers can use them, people in wheelchairs can use it. You're talking about that fitness area where people can work on strength, flexibility, range of motion, endurance. At the one end, another key activity on this is the walking trails is using Nordic walking skills. I talked to a couple of physicians. If people aren't using canes by the time they're 85, you probably aren't getting them to use a cane. But if you get them doing Nordic walking when they're 50 and 60, so now it's a hip thing to do, besides the fact that it burns 30% more calories and it's much easier on their knees, now they think it's kind of cool. My dad, who's 90, will use his walking sticks, but he will not touch a cane. And so if we can get Nordic walking going down there where people feel comfortable walking with other people. Ping pong, another great activity. You can have outdoor ping pong tables, and they know that that's proven to help with Alzheimer's. All right, and focusing cognitive skills. You can have yoga, Tai Chi, and we also have the people that are at Beaver Creek Reserve have offered to sponsor a bluebird trail in there. We've also got people interested in maybe developing butterfly gardens. For example, as those people who are interested in gardening can come out. But if you haven't been down to McDonough Park, it is a jewel of the city. If you're a photographer and you want to see sunsets, go to McDonough Park. But that park has the potential to be a huge impact on this community. And I do think we're going to see more of them, but you don't want too many of them because pickleball is successful in Eau Claire because we have one great facility. And so we have people coming from River Falls, from Wausau, and all over coming to play pickleball because we get a critical mass coming together, and that's what we need to do for our different populations who are now not served. So they know that when they show up there, there'll be people there that they can engage with. So I hope you support this. I think it's going to really change the health and wellness, especially of our seniors in this community and those people with mobility challenges that are currently underserved.
Thank you. If you could just hang a sec to see, do any council members have questions? I don't see any. Thank you for your presentation. Anyone else here this evening who would like to speak on the active aging proposal for McDonough Park? Is there anyone else this evening? Seeing no one else, we will close item 1 and move to our second item on our agenda. This is a study session, a study issue for 20 minutes regarding our keeping of honeybees ordinance. This is item number 2. Will help. It's an update to the City Council about the beekeeping ordinance. Ms. Stromberger is here as well as, I believe, Mr. Steinbach potentially. So, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. So this is a study issue for council that was requested at your October 23rd meeting. I'm just going to give a brief summary of the changes that were proposed at that time and then open it up for your discussion. So the changes, first of all, recommended by staff involve shifting the license to a calendar year from a March 1 license. It would allow properties larger than 10 acres to have 1 colony per acre, up to a total of 49 colonies. Hives not under active management would have to be removed or dismantled, and a beekeeper would have to destroy or requeen the hive if hive exhibits unusually aggressive characteristics. And then the changes that generated most of the discussion and concern or questions at the October 23rd meeting involved requirements for neighbor objections if a dwelling is located within 50 feet of the hive location. And then the permitting of beekeeping in certain public spaces. As proposed in the ordinance, hives in public spaces would have to be enclosed and secured against entry by the public. Hives would have to be at least 50 feet from a property line and 75 feet from any public amenity. And a beekeeper would have to provide insurance, naming the city as an additional insured. Staff has hesitation about public space beekeeping due largely to concerns about public safety, vandalism, space and aesthetics in our parks, as well as maintenance that might be involved. So this ordinance was postponed for action until your next round of meetings on January 21 and 22. And so staff is looking for direction if council desires any changes to the current draft. So possible options that exist on the items that generated discussion at the last meeting. Regarding the neighbor consent, of course, you could approve it as proposed in the existing draft in front of you. You could go back to the original existing ordinance, which would require the gathering of signatures from a certain percentage of neighbors. You could allow anyone receiving notice. This ordinance draft allows notice to anyone within 100 feet of the proposed hive location. You could allow anyone in that distance to object, or another radius that you would choose. Or you could require consent from a smaller radius of neighbors than is currently in the ordinance. And then regarding the public space, of course you can approve as drafted. You could choose to not permit it, or a suggestion is to limit the number of hives in each park so that the larger parks would not be permitted to have, for example, up to the 49 colonies that could potentially be permitted. So with that, I can take any questions. Health Department is here, as well as Community Services.
Thank you, Ms. Stromberger. First question is from Councilmember Strobel.
Thank you. Stromberger, if we, on G there, if we went back to the original consent, it seems to me we just passed a bee ordinance not that long ago. And I'm wondering if any of the hive owners have had problems with the way it was originally written, and or why we might be sort of changing it. And then as another part of that same question, it said, the way it's written here, that property owners within 50 feet may object in writing within 14 days. If, let's just say, let's say the license gets issued, can they object at any time throughout the course of the year, or what happens at that point in time? A license issued and a property owner has a problem, like, a month later, then what's the process? So I guess there's a couple of questions with that section.
Sure. And I can answer them to the best of my ability. Other departments may have answers for that as well. I have not heard of any inability to obtain a license due to a lack of signatures. The concern I heard was that it's time consuming and, trying to find people at home, it became a burden for license holders. If complaints were received about a license, say in June when bees are really active, those would be, of course, investigated by the health department, determine if any actual license issues exist, but we wouldn't be able to revoke or suspend a license unless there was an actual issue. The fact that somebody might object to the license would have to wait until the next license year would come around.
And let's say there was an objection in June when the bees are active. Health department goes out there. The person that has the hive is following the rules they're supposed to follow. Then there's really not much recourse for the other citizen with the complaint, is there?
That's correct.
Thank you, Councilmember Strobel. Councilmember Jean.
Thank you. Brief questions. Have there any city in Wisconsin that raise bee?
There are a number of cities that permit beekeeping. I think we would be the first, and Mr. Steinbach he's affirming that we would be the first to allow public space beekeeping.
Second question, are there any concern about bee biting? I know a lot of people have allergy to biting, is that any concern or complaint from people who, or city where they raise bee, has there any concern about that issues?
That is, that's one of the concerns that I mentioned is the reason for the staff hesitation is the public safety factor of it, that people may not be anticipating there being, certainly there are bees outdoors that people expect, but they might not expect them in the large volume that would be present in a park due to a hive's
Can I
presence there.
the question? Do you know, is there like how many people in this area want to raise bee? I should say, is Oakley City, or people interested in raise bee, or they just, what is your opinion about?
I don't have any idea of numbers on that. I don't know if Councilmember Worthman, maybe Mr. Steinbach might have an idea on that.
Matt Steinbach, Environmental Sciences Division Manager for the Health Department. We have not permitted very many license holders within the city. I think under 5 typically in a year. There has been some interest expressed from other people, but we have not had a large interest in city beekeeping to this point.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Beaton?
I have a question related to kind of going off of Councilmember Strobel's question based on if the current rules have inhibited anybody from acquiring a permit. How does the process actually happen? Is it if somebody was not able to get the signatures of their neighbors, is it possible that they would just stop before even telling the city? Are there people that don't have a license and we don't really even know that they had an issue with the process?
That's correct. Unless they came to us and said they were having difficulty attaining the signatures, we wouldn't necessarily know that they were interested in being a beekeeper. I can speak just a little more on process. And we did a review of the other municipalities in the state, and the notification and consent process for Eau Claire per ordinance was much more stringent than any of the other ordinances within the state. So the notification followed by opportunity to object is much more widely used as a process than a written consent from 80% of neighbors.
Further questions? Councilmember Weld?
Thank you, Acting President. We touched on it a little bit the last time we spoke about this. Has there been any thought or discussion in regards to, once the objections do come before us, how we are going to respond? Or is there a criteria? Is there a protocol? Is there something that we'll use so that it's consistent from objection to objection?
We haven't created criteria yet, not knowing, what the status of the ordinance was going to be. Certainly, if we receive an objection, we'd come up with, some sort of guidelines for you to be looking at, but it would be a matter of council discretion, just as an alcohol license is, we have guidelines that you can take into consideration, but it's ultimately a matter of council discretion. As long as your decision isn't arbitrary, as long as there's reasoning behind what you do, you're able to make whatever decision is deemed necessary.
Okay. A follow-up?
Sure.
In the parks, so it'd be like a chain link fence, or what type of fencing, and how high, and how far from the hives would the fence be?
So as far as the fence specifics, I don't think we've gone into that level of detail. Their fencing is commonly used in beekeeping for a variety of reasons, to shield from winter weather, to shield aesthetically, to actually manipulate the way the bees fly in and out of the hives. So fencing is commonly used. There's a lot of different options, and I think that's something we'd eventually look at more specifically, and it may be a site-by-site or type of evaluation too. Maybe one sort of fencing works better than others. Like a mesh wire chain link fence does allow bees to fly through it, where something with a finer mesh material would actually manipulate bees to force them to fly up and away from areas of heavy traffic, those types of things.
So it would be a secured, only the beekeeper would actually have a key or access to the fenced area?
The way the ordinance would be drafted would be that the beekeeper and then community services as well as the health department would have access to it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Strobel?
Thank you. In this discussion as well, right? So, yeah. One of my concerns is the number of the beehives in the public parks. and/or, this sort of started out as just for the hobbyist, I thought, where they could have 2 hives. And now, potentially, we have up to 49 hives in a public park. Besides potentially being unsightly, it becomes more of a business than a hobby. And at what point in time does it become a business? If a person has 2 hives, that's a little bit of honey. If they have, 2 at home and 2 in every park, then it becomes more of a business because that's going to have to be processed and probably sold. I don't, and at what point in time, what happens with regulations on stuff like that?
So there's not really a specific size where something becomes a commercial pursuit. It's really on what they use it for. When they start processing, there are other food processing requirements and retail licenses and things that they would need to get. There's also residential laws here in the city that prohibit sale of material within residential areas. We talked about that a little bit when the poultry ordinance was going through. But as far as what an agricultural pursuit is, that 50 number, which is why it's capped at 49. So I guess there isn't a firm number of when something becomes a commercial endeavor. And there are some laws in place. When you're talking about public spaces, maybe some of those residential laws don't apply, but then there's also laws on, and I don't know them quite as well, on selling of product in public spaces as well and what you can do. But there are, once you start processing honey, there are other state laws that do apply and regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Beaton.
We've talked a couple of times about educational institutions and beehives being allowed on their property for educational purposes. Do you think that the public spaces portion of this ordinance change would apply to that, or do we have one already?
This is not limiting to residential, and the interest from educational institutions was part of why the additional classifications of size, number of colonies, colony density is being proposed.
So under these changes, that would be allowed?
Correct.
I wanted to ask a question, but if I could, Mr. Steinbach, the public spaces section starts off by saying that it's approved by, locations are approved by the Director of Community Services or his or her designee. And I'm wondering if, when I think about the public spaces piece of this, I have a hard time imagining anyone would request 49 hives. I know that was more of an educational opportunity, but my feeling is that maybe this language is saying that if the Public Services Director doesn't think 49 hives belong, they don't belong. And they would probably, it gives them discretion to decide, in a sense, to decide that. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct, and I think along the lines of the public spaces and residential, any type of, anything that would align with this ordinance, there is discretion for site characteristics that maybe we would look at scaling back an apiary or the number of hives based on proximity to other things. There's always the ability to be more stringent than what is in here as long as we're consistent.
Council member, I'll go first with Councilmember Emanuel.
Thank you, Acting President Orthman. Thank you for the presentation and just helping council pause and learn a little bit more about this before we vote on it later this month. I noticed that the largest aspect of the fiscal impact is basically recoupment for the staff time that's involved with this. Does it seem that the current dollar amount, which is, just saw it recently, but 100 and change. Thank you, Councilmember Weld. 125 and all the other fees listed for the health department. Is that seem accurate for recouping what everybody needs, or should we be broadening the conversation to look at a fee change to make sure it's covering what you all need to do the business?
The health department, for the health department contribution of the fees, we do review that annually and have calculations to recoup program costs, part of program costs. As far as the public space fee, that has not been determined, and there would be a different look at that fee because there's other parties involved in that discussion that would need to determine that. So there is not a public space fee included in this.
Thank you. Councilmember Weld, did you still have a question?
Councilmember Manuel asked more or less the same question.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Strobel?
And mine's on that same pathway as Councilmember Emmanuel. We've got a sample resolution in front of us here, and maybe you're aware of that with the fees and stuff on it. So just so I'm clear on that, what we're looking at changing in our fee schedule is the fees that the city of Eau Claire charges and charging $40. Then there's additional fees that the city county health department charges. Is that, so that's separate from the city? Okay. If
Thank you.
that's true, then that clarifies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Strobel. Further questions, thoughts? We had, my apologies, City Manager Peters.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. If I could perhaps add to the discussion, there was just a little bit of perspective. You know, this is a study session, and so staff is looking for direction on you know, we'd like to bring back ordinances that match as closely as they can, you know, with what council's looking for. So, you know, at the end of this time, the idea is that if there are changes or further direction that you have, you know, that's what we're looking for is just some direction there. There was a brief question about if there's an objection and it would come to council, and how would that be handled, and what criteria you would use. And if I could put just a few perspectives or comments on that. One of the ways to perhaps avoid some of those challenges related to an objection and having to you know, work through that and develop the criteria and all that would go with that is to just have very clear definitions or standards. So if rather than saying, you know, if there's an objection, it becomes before council. If another alternative to that would be to have very clear and specific objectives, and it's the setbacks. It might be a number of signatures, it may not be, but just very clear and definitive. And if somebody meets it, they get the license, and if they don't, they don't. So one of the the challenges by saying that, well, you know, you can do it unless there's an objective, and then we'll figure it out at the council level in a discussion. If you don't want to go down that path, then another alternative is to just be very specific about what the acceptable standards are, and those are the standards for the community, and then the person either meets them or they don't meet them, and then you wouldn't have to have that appeal process coming to the council. So just some thoughts or perspective on that, if that's of interest to you.
Thank you, City Manager Peters. If I could just say, we've come up to our 20-minute time. Is there a feeling by council that we should extend that time? Just looking for your input. Okay, then if I could, I'll ask that we put another 10 minutes on our study session without any objection. See no objection. Okay, Councilmember Emmanuel.
Thank you, Acting President Orthman, and thank you, City Manager Peters, for just the invitation and reminder for us to give some feedback. So I'll take the first volley at that. I think the research and the presentation and kind of status of what the proposal could look like, I think it looks very sound. I think if you feel that the fees really do cover your costs, great. And I think it's easier to change that now or edit anything now. And that's up to you all to advise us on what that looks like. So I would say please don't be shy about, if you reevaluate and you need to change it, please let us know. And then in my opinion, I think it's better to set up some criteria ahead of time before we have a situation that we need to render an opinion. I think no matter what the situation is, I think it's, if you're that individual being evaluated by the council, if there's not set criteria, I think it's really impossible to feel that you had a totally objective evaluation versus, okay, this is a criteria and the standards and this is how and why the decision was made. So that would be the one major change I would say is please bring forth criteria in which council could deliberate and make an opinion whether or not to grant an exception or not. And that's just my opinion, so other council members may feel differently.
Thank you, Councilmember Emanuel. Councilmember Beaton?
Thank you. I also like the direction that this is going. I'm comfortable with with the structure of opening up an objection process for neighbors, but agree that there should be a criteria made maybe even before we pass the changes. Understand why they haven't been made yet, since these changes aren't actually coming to us to be voted on yet. I also am really excited about the public spaces portion of the changes. I think that this opens. I see the list of parks on the public spaces portion of the changes, and I see a lot of spaces where there are gardens, and I think that beekeeping could be a new form of community and urban gardening. And so I definitely, I've been engaged with the Forestry Garden and the Demler Park Garden, and know that those folks are equally as interested in protecting the bee population in order to support their gardening hobby, as well as their interest in growing their own food. And so I really like that and hope that it might stay. I would suggest looking at some more details, kind of along the lines of what Councilmember Weld was talking about, some guidelines of what the fences might look like and how tall they might be and that sort of thing. So otherwise, I think this is great. So thanks for all the work that you've put into it.
Thank you, Councilmember Beaton. Councilmember Weld was next.
Thank you, Acting President. Again, I'll jump back to statements made in October. I felt, and the question was brought up by Councilmember Strobel earlier this evening, that could we at least find out if there's been an abnormal amount of people that have not been able to have hives because of objection by neighbors, or from my involvement, it seems like the system that we have in place is working. But if there is a lot of people that really haven't been able to do this now because of getting the 80%, I'd just be curious, and I don't even know if that's possible for you to get that answer, but I feel like in this area, and back to the chickens too, if there's an opportunity for neighbors to talk to neighbors and get out and introduce yourselves and answer questions and educate each other on bees and what it means, well, I think that's a win-win for our neighborhoods, for our community, and for the people that are going to be involved. Now we pretty much are eliminating any interaction between the neighbors. They're not required to talk to a neighbor, even if they're right next door. All the interaction is between the city and the applicant or the objector. But so I like the way it worked before, and from what everyone I've dealt with and talked to, it's all worked so far. And so I guess I'm curious if there's some resounding number of people that have not been able to do this, and that's why we're making this change.
Thank you for those comments, Councilmember Weld. Councilmember Christopherson.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. I like the redirection that we had from the city manager about, I think that our questions were about the use of public lands, and it seems like the ordinance should give some definition to who is asking to use, and that should be part of the permit process. If it's intended for education, then I think that maybe that's where we want to start, that it should be institutional as opposed to somebody thinking that it's just council member Jill Christopherson wanting to put 20 hives in a park. That just has a whole different intention. So I would like to see a little bit more fleshed out. It talks about public spaces and where, but I think maybe we would want to suggest why is it being used in public? Is it public to public? Which would make a lot of sense to me. And then I would like to also amplify the idea that Councilmember Weld, I'm very much in favor of neighbor engagement. I think that the fabric of our community is built when we talk about our intentions person to person instead of going through a permit process. If our permitting process is more stringent than other communities in Wisconsin, then maybe we're overachieving a bit. But if we matched what other communities are doing, but maybe didn't have to have it in writing, but, well, yeah. I think that we're using writing so that we're telling ourselves that I know that my neighbors have been approached. But if they're, what other communities are doing, if it supports that in engagement, but doesn't really put that onerous work of signature, I would be in favor of that. But any ordinance that the city sets, if our neighbor meets that ordinance, but I don't like what he did, you know, it's, so I think it would be more consistent if it was just the application process. If you're in, you're in, and then if there's some problems, then those would be addressed in the next application.
Thank you, Councilmember Christopherson. Councilmember Strobel.
I would concur with the last two on that, on that section G again, the notification. I supported the B ordinance the last time through, and if people are not having an issue with the system the way it's set up now, but if it's potentially onerous, I could see maybe changing the percent or looking at that a little bit, but still going with the notification. Because I think the way it is now, I think, as Ms. Stromberger said, as long as a council decision is not arbitrary, well, unless you have some really specific things that people can talk about, it's going to be arbitrary. And then we have to think about what those conditions are. So I'd rather not go there. I think if we can follow a process and initially up front, I think that would be preferable for me. The only other thing I have is the public spaces. I'm pretty concerned about that. I think 49 hives is a bunch. I think if we're going to get into the public space thing, I'd prefer to keep it on a hobby level where you're not talking about a lot of hives and see how that goes. But 49 hives to me is more of a commercial venture and not something I want to see in a city park. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Strobel. Councilmember Graggart.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman, and thank you, Ms. Stromberger and Mr. Steinbuck for your work on this. I guess overall, I definitely like the direction that this is going. I do feel we need to flesh out the public spaces topic more, including looking at potentially not allowing so many as 49 hives. But I guess I had a question in wanting also to recognize the hesitation that staff has on the public spaces piece. I guess one of the questions is how these particular public parks were chosen, and then the other part would be if there's any particular parks that are listed that are not, or like that give you the most amount of hesitation, I guess you could say. I guess we're maybe out of time here too. But.
Well, we just came up against our, my apologies for interrupting, we just came up against we buzzed through our additional 10 minutes, as City Manager Peters said. Could we add another 10 minutes to this item unless there's objection from council? Do I have an objection? Councilmember Strobel?
Potentially, we're taking public comment on this as well?
Yes. Actually, no.
We're not, okay.
It will be when the ordinance comes forward.
When it's introduced in an ordinance.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Weld?
Just a question in regards to the public parks and the fencing. Would the fencing be at the cost?
Sorry, my apologies, Councilmember Weld. I thought you were raising an objection to the additional 10
no.
minutes. Okay, then if before you ask that question, if we could, Councilmember Greigert had asked a question and I had interrupted. So, Ms. Stromberg, would you be able to address the question?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Pippinger, who's on his way up.
Thanks.
Good evening.
Good evening.
If I recall, your question was how did we come up with this list of parks? Again, we were looking at parks that didn't have a lot of traffic through them at the time being, and then also looking at the locations that had some community gardens, so some areas that would benefit from the pollinators that would be there. Our objection initially was because of the safety. We do have a concern with putting people in our parks and then also having a high density of bees with the thought that some people have allergies to bees. Not everybody carries their EpiPen around with them, and we didn't want to have that conflict.
I have a follow-up question, please.
Sure.
I guess it would be that it seems the only one that is really, the only park that really kind of stands out to me as being maybe significantly different than the ones that are listed. There's Demler as being perhaps the smallest. And is there, basically you would consider all of these particular parks listed to be of equal concern from a public safety standpoint? Or is it a matter of maybe trimming the list of parks that would relieve some of the concern from staff?
Well, again, a lot of the parks we do have programming at, so we do have children there during the summertime. And then also we have trails. The 4th Street Green area is going to have a trail going through there with the Veterans Tribute Trail. They'll be going through there sometime later this year, hopefully. In answer to your question, there are probably 2 areas that might fit that definition. The Kais property, which is more of a rural area. It's not in the Eau Claire proper area. And then also potentially in the Jeffers garden area would be some areas that might have some buffer away from some of the park space that we see a high density of people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further questions? Input? Councilmember Weld?
Thank you. Thank you, Acting President. Just in regards to the cost of the fencing then for the hives in the park, would that be the beekeeper that would be responsible for the fencing? And
yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then I'm assuming signage would be up to alerting people that there are bees in the area or beekeepers in the area? And that would be the city's cost, probably?
Well, we'd have to talk about that. We have the ability to make signage for areas, but that's something too that we could put back onto the beekeepers.
Thank you, Councilmember Weld. Councilmember Strobel?
For the structures in the park, might be difficult to charge, let's say all of us want to have a couple of hives in one park. And we don't all have to put up separate structures. There's just going to be one structure, right? I mean, you're not going to have separate structures for each hive. Would you have, or would you? I mean, then you're talking about a lot of structures. So I'm just wondering about on the cost and how you would maybe cost share for I don't know. I guess I'm trying to think. You're not going to have a separate structure for each hive, would we?
No, I wouldn't foresee that. Again, I believe what we would be doing is keeping it into an area. Again, we have the ability to, 49 hives, I agree with you, that's too many into an area. So we would have that discretion to limit what we felt would be appropriate. We don't know what that number is right now. We haven't done this before, so this would be something that we would have to learn as we go along.
Might be, if we decide we're going to do that in a certain park and we kind of have an idea how many hives, I guess maybe depending on the first applicant, but would we be better to construct those enclosures ourselves and charge each individual hive person to use our enclosures? Or I just don't see how it's going to work to share those costs.
Yeah, that could be something that we do. Certainly, we have that ability to enclose an area and then have the number of hives that we feel would be appropriate.
Councilmember Beaton?
Yeah, thinking more about this public spaces portion. I'm not super sure how comfortable I feel with individuals in public spaces, but I imagine it more of a organizational activity coordinated by a neighborhood or a community garden, and so I guess I would need some convincing maybe to agree to be in support of an individual public spaces beekeeping activity. So, yeah.
And if I could just kind of go off of that as well, I think I'm in the same place as you are, that, and if you see section C here, talks about first rights of a neighborhood association, or it says neighborhood garden association to potentially to keep bees. And I actually had discussions a few months ago with XL Energy, and they're looking to do more pollinators. They had expressed an interest to potentially want to do a hive. And so I think I'd be in favor of having it not just be individuals, but be an association or a business or something that would have a user agreement in place or put in place to do something like that. And I do remember a number of years ago when we passed this, we had the Chippewa Valley Beekeeper Association. Drew Kaiser came and talked about how some cities had done fully walled, like wood around the hives so that bees have to go up and over, and therefore, it's a much safer situation, and it's sort of tucked away from the general public. They don't stumble into it. So I think there's a way to do this, but I don't foresee 49 hives or that even being, we could limit that. I think it's probably a 1 or 2 or maybe up to 4 in a big park or something like that. But I'm in the same thinking as you on that. So, and then on the neighbor, the biggest issues with neighbors is if someone is allergic to bees, that you want to have the ability for either the health department or for that neighbor to be able to object and say they don't want it for health and safety and not have it, because it's it's a life or death situation. Bee death from a bee sting is incredibly rare. It's less than snake bite, lightning strike kind of situation, but you still want to be cognizant of it. Do council members have any further input? I think, City Manager Peters.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. Just in terms of, we're trying to synthesize this to see what do we bring back to you. Mm-hmm. And at this point, I think we've heard that perhaps in the public space, not the individual, but something that's more group related, and then maybe a limited number of some sort. If I could follow up a little bit more on your comment with the criteria and I guess the objection. What would the thought be? So, for example, I know a couple of you raised the point that you'd like to see some criteria ahead of time. I would caution that that's going to answer a lot of your questions, and perhaps Ms. Stromberger can weigh in on it. But the criteria is going to provide some topics to consider. And they're going to be generally in nature, and they'll be somewhat subjective, but you will still have to make a decision on that. And so, for example, and I think you raised a really good one, Acting Council President Worthman, if someone brings an objection that they're concerned because they have someone that has an allergy, or they have people that have allergies that come to their house, and that's an automatic, my question to you is, do you want to build some of those into the ordinance, and then they don't ever have to come to you? Because if there are some things that we know that would be an automatic, and they are the reasons we would say, I mean, to the extent that we can deal with those ahead of time and put them in the ordinance, it takes a lot of that subjectivity out of it, and that subjectivity that would have to then come before you and go through all that process of hearing it and trying to do that. So I'm trying to tease that out a little bit to see if there's an appetite for that. And, you know, with your comment, I mean, if that's, I mean, you know, you could build that in that says if there's an objection based upon health or safety, it's a no, well, then that would be, you know, the rule, and you define, you know, where the people would have to be, how far away or something like that. But first, I guess maybe Ms. Stromberger, if you could just weigh in on how much guidance criteria would really provide or not provide, you know, in order to be able to, you know, help with the decision of an appeal.
Like I was referencing earlier, you know, I think council struggles when you get an alcohol license in front of you and you have multiple applicants for that license. What criteria are you basing it on? And we do provide you with that list of factors that you can consider. But like I said, they're just factors that you can consider. They're not black and white, yes or no, based on this criteria. And it's going to be the same with a beekeeping license, with the poultry ordinance that you just approved. It's going to be the same thing. You're still going to have a decision point in front of you based on factors that we give you that you can consider, that you won't be limited to. You can take other things into consideration as well. So, you know, if there are certain striking points that you would definitely say a yes or no on, then those should and can be in an ordinance. And, you know, those need never come to, you know, the council decision point, that those can be an administrative decision.
Mr. Steinbach?
If I could just speak to that, the allergy issue is the largest consideration for the health department. Actually, as it's written currently, there's a gap there where someone could have an allergy, but their neighbors fulfill the 80% requirement, and we may never know about it. So that's just something for transparency reasons, where we could have a situation where somebody may be able or may have an allergy and not have the ability to veto it, where in a situation where we're talking about where a neighboring, somebody within 50 feet or a neighboring property has an allergy that's severe, has that ability, that's not under existing ordinance. So just a situation that we'd want to probably talk about a little more.
So we've reached the end of our 10 minutes again. What would council members like to do? Do we feel like there's enough direction at this point? Yeah, let's work forward on that. I think we still got time in coming weeks. And if you want to, I believe that council members can directly be in touch with Ms. Stromberger and Mr. Steinbach as well, if they want to follow up with ideas or thoughts. But I think we provided enough to kind of allow the city manager and the city attorney's office to work forward on this. So thank you for a wonderful discussion, a great discussion. Like I said, just please feel free to reach out if there's other things that come up. We'll move then to our next item on our agenda, which is our public comment period. I don't believe anyone signed up this evening, but Ms. Merle is just double checking. Nope, okay. So no one has signed up this evening during our public comment period. We will then adjourn this meeting without any objection.
The Eau Claire City Council meeting will return in a moment. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM. We now return you to the Eau Claire City Council meeting.
We could call this meeting the Eau Claire City Council to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson. Beaton.
Here.
Berge. Christofferson.
Here.
Emmanuel.
Here.
Gregert.
Here.
Strobel.
Here.
Weld.
Here.
Worthman.
Here.
Jean.
Here.
You have quorum. Thank you all for coming down this evening to City Hall. Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Want to just say real quick that Valley Media Works will be live streaming these proceedings this evening for those who weren't able to join us. To see that, please visit valleymediaworks.org on Government Channel 99.4. That's on Charter Cable. And also note that this is being simulcast on WRFP LP 101.9 FM. You can also find past meetings of the City Council posted on Valley Media Works YouTube channel as well. Thank you again, everyone, for coming down this evening. We're going to get started then moving right away into our first agenda item, which is the consent agenda. Do council members have a wish to pull any items separately or any questions regarding any of the items that are listed within the consent agenda this evening? Any desire? Seeing no such desire, then on a motion by Councilmember Strobel, seconded by Councilmember Emmanuel, the consent agenda has been moved. Is there discussion? Seeing no desire for discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Beaton.
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
Emmanuel.
Aye.
Gregert.
Aye.
Strobel.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Jean.
Aye.
And that item passes. I have one proclamation this evening to present. If I could ask Dr. Salika Ducksworth-Lawton to please approach the podium. I'm just going to read a few lines here, and then if you want to make a few comments afterward. So I'm just going to read a few lines from our proclamation this evening for Dr. Martin Luther King Day. Whereas federal, state, and local governments, including the state of Wisconsin, Eau Claire County, and the city of Eau Claire, annually observe the Monday of January as national, the third Monday of January is National Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And whereas in 1994, the U.S. Congress designated Martin Luther King Jr. holiday as a national day of observance and encourages all Americans to observe this day with appropriate civic, community service, and educational programs. And whereas Eau Claire City Hall and related administrative offices will be closed on Monday, January 21st, not as a holiday for city employees, but to provide an opportunity for city staff to address community service opportunities and participate in diversity training and in other service-educated programs. And whereas commemorating Dr. King's life is not only a tribute to his dreams and his contributions to our nation and the world, but is also a reminder that every day each of us can play a part in continuing his important work. Now, therefore, I, Andrew Worthman, acting president of the Eau Claire City Council, and on behalf of my fellow city council members, do hereby proclaim Monday, January 21st, 2019 as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the city of Eau Claire, and encourage all of our citizens to recognize and join us in this very important day. So thank you for being here, Dr. Salika Ducksworth-Lawton, and I will just hand this to you and ask if you could say a few words for everyone as well.
Thank you. On the behalf of Uniting Bridges, we hope to see all of you there. We are very grateful for the support of the City of Eau Claire. Thanks to the support of City Council and many of the people in this room, we now have a Martin Luther King program that is a model throughout this state and is beginning to get national and international attention. We are modeling how people work together, how different groups work together, and especially how we can bridge racial differences in a time of great conflict. So I thank you for your continuing support, and I hope that I will see you on Monday, January 21st, if only so that you can see the music and the singers, which will be fabulous this year.
Thank you. We'll move then to our first item on our business agenda this evening. Item number 17 is regarding McDonough Park. This is a resolution approving McDonough Park active aging design proposal. If I could actually just make a note real quick that for folks who are here this evening, I think everyone caught it already, but if your item was on the consent agenda, we passed that as one item, and all of the items there passed. So I just wanted to point that out as there's been some confusion in the past. Moving back to our business agenda, item number 17. This active aging design proposal, we had a conversation last night with Mr. Todd Koala, and is there any additional things that you would like to add to this presentation or that the council might have in terms of questions this evening?
Perhaps I think to address Councilman Gregor's questions from last night.
Okay.
The conceptual drawing isn't quite as accurate as it's going to be. I was talking to Mr. Solberg yesterday. On Center Street, there would be, when the time comes, there certainly could be sidewalk improvements leading into the park off of Center Street. But ultimately, the trail design along the rib of the hill here is intended to continue on along that bluff line, linking up with Mount Simon Park and eventually to the High Bridge on Forest Street. If that clarifies that a little bit for you.
Do you have a follow-up question, Councilmember Gregor?
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. Thank you, Mr. Koala. So is the plan to have a sidewalk along that road access, like in the park as well, or?
Correct.
I imagine that trail segment to the west will not be completed in time for the park.
Right. The regional trail would connect eventually, and that will depend on funding and as when we get that segment connected to Mount Simon.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that update.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the clarification. Do other council members have any clarifying questions or follow-up regarding McDonough Park? Councilmember Emanuel.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. Thank you, Mr. Koala. Do you have just a high-level time frame of when you anticipate kind of next steps and maybe even completion of the work? I know we're still a ways out, but just a high-level time frame.
Sure. The executing of this plan, I would expect some of the improvements are going to be dependent on fundraising from the interest group, that the Active Aging Coalition, if you will. A good portion of the work, the roadway improvements and the parking lot improvements are scheduled for this year, 2019. Painting and striping the pickleball courts, currently right now they're asphalt with white striping, but coloring and conditioning the courts is scheduled to happen also this summer. As far as getting the other amenities, I think the bocce courts and some of the low-impact fitness equipment would likely happen in this calendar year as well. I could see that happening. And opening the view sheds and the vistas that you see along here, and certainly that would be done with in-house staff, and we could begin that as probably sometime after Labor Day, as our summer season begins to get a little more predictable and manageable. You're welcome.
Thank you. Any further questions? I don't see any. Thank you, Mr. Koala.
Thank you.
Then on a motion offered by Councilmember Weld, seconded by Councilmember Beaton, McDonough Park, active aging design proposal has been moved. This is item number 17. Is there any desire to speak or make amendments on this issue? I'll call first on Councilmember Christopherson.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. I am always so pleased and proud to listen to projects like this because, again, it shows the vibrancy and the willingness of staff to meet with citizens and come up with something that is really spectacular. And the citizen testimony last night about the values of senior passive fitness. It was, again, just, it's a perfect product for a really good location in Eau Claire. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Emanuel.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. I think really for me, it's easy to be for a park, and I will certainly be supporting this. I think what really touches me is that this is really about building social capital and building social connections within our community. And I was really moved when the speaker shared last night that it was a place, the park has become a place, and pickleball has become a place where people who are working through personal grief and loss have been able to come to help center them and help heal. And grief is hard. And so to be able to have a place where we can care for one another in our parks is a wonderful thing. So thank you for all of the work that everybody has done. And this is going to be a wonderful model, not only for our community, but I think in our state and our country.
Thank you. Further comments? Councilmember Strobel.
Thank you. I'm going to support this as well. I think it's a great park, it looks like, and everybody worked together hard on it. I think it's a really big benefit for the neighborhood around there as well. When we redid Boyd Park and stuff, it's a really nice way to improve value and improve the neighborhood around the park. So I think that's a positive as well. The only sad thing here is I think as part of a city council fund, I think it'd be nice if we could schedule a pickleball event for all of us on the city council that have never played before. And I'm afraid it might be too cold yet by the time I'm still on council. But if you do it in the summer, invite me, and I would certainly like to come. So I'm going to support it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Councilmember Strobel. Councilmember Beaton.
Yeah, just really quick, I wanted to echo the thanks to staff for continuing to prioritize our investments in our parks. It's kind of cool that Eau Claire has seen such a revitalization of our parks, and I think that we heard last night unequivocally that our parks are a place where people come together and share community, and so glad to see that continue in McDonough and parks across our country. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments, clerk, please call the roll on item number 17, McDonough Park Active Aging Proposal.
Councilmember Christopherson. Aye. Emanuel.
Aye.
Gregert.
Aye.
Strobel.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Beaton.
Aye.
That item passes. We'll move then to item number 18, which is an agreement. This resolution would authorize the city manager to renew membership in Rain to Rivers of Western Wisconsin, Incorporated, by executing the MS4 permitted municipal agreement for stormwater education and outreach coordination by Rain to Rivers. Mr. Jenskow. Good evening.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. This is for the renewal of our membership into Rain to Rivers. This is a brief graphic of the members that are in this group. In the last go around about 3 years ago, we expanded to the west. That's when we changed from the Chippewa Valley Stormwater Management Forum to Rain to Rivers of Western Wisconsin. That was because these communities in the west became part of the MS4 program. The DNR suggested that they join our organization, and they asked us if we would expand to include them. The other point about that, too, is we're probably about the third of about 10 organizations around the state. We were the third to form, and the DNR has used us as a model that they've suggested to some of the other organizations that have formed after us. I'm briefly going to run through some slides just to give you a flavor of what Rain to Rivers is and what it is that we do. If you want to ask more detail, you can follow up with me afterwards. Basically, we provide public education and outreach, public involvement and participation, and a forum for peer networking and idea sharing. Some of the benefits that we see out of it is it gives us a chance to pool our personnel and our funding resources. The other thing about community outreach is it doesn't stop at corporate limits. And so it gives us a way of sharing everything without worrying about who's doing what for who. Educates citizens about stormwater runoff. It meets our permit requirement for our municipal stormwater permit, and it allows us to share knowledge within our communities. We have a website, raintorivers.org. There's also a Facebook page that goes along with that. We do a number of things where we shared resources. You might recognize the banner that we have at Carson Park. Last year was in left field. A couple significant things about it is we made it to the Leader Telegram in front of a nice catch by the outfielder. We also made, ESPN periodically does great plays of catches. And one time a member of the Express made a diving catch, made ESPN on their network reel, and we were in the background of that too. One of the things that we do during those games on weekends is we have a promotional giveaway that if you log on to our site during the game, then you're entered into a drawing and you can win $10 of chamber bucks as a way of spurring interest. We have displays that we set up at a number of events. I've seen some of you council members at some of those events. We have door hangings. We have some informational videos. You may have seen some of those at the movie theaters when you've been there. One is a fish in a goldfish in a fishbowl. There's another one that has little rubber duckies representing different pollutant sources. We have informational brochures. We also have a mini grant program that nonprofits can apply to grants from us for putting in rain gardens and other informational type things, and we help fund those. We have a history of success. We've put on a number of conferences. A number of years ago, we did a BMP tour for developers and their engineers to show them BMPs that we in the Rain to Rivers thought worked very well so that they could copy those in their developments. We did another workshop on erosion control of things that we expected, and another one for consultants and developers on implementing stormwater practices within their developments. We've done another one on for municipal officials about what the permitting did for the municipalities. And there was another one, the phosphorus ban came out. We put on one for landscapers as to how to survive that. We've developed school curriculum that is targeted for middle school and high school, very similar to junior achievement. We modeled after that, and that's been distributed to all the high schools and middle schools in northwestern Wisconsin. We have signage at rain gardens. You might see one of the signages on Water Street between 1st and 2nd. There's a rain garden for the university parking lot there. We also have signage that we have at just about all of our stormwater facilities around town, reminding people that that's just not a hole in the ground, that is stormwater that's going somewhere, and to treat it well. We've done a number of presentations. This is just a small handful of them. And then looking forward, we've gotten a number of grants over time, mostly from the DNR, but recently we got a grant from Xcel Energy. And one of the things we'll be funding with that grant this spring is another workshop on erosion control. That's been a hot topic. Seems like we have to remind people every so often about what needs to be done. And some of you have gotten phone calls on some of our recent developments, and this is part of the answer to that. We've teamed up with NASICA, the North American Stormwater Erosion Control Association, to put on a seminar for that, scheduled for late April. Another one that we've done twice in the past and we'll do again this fall has to do with winter maintenance training. Our street staff have gone to that the last several ones, but these are targeted towards both public and private enterprises that are taking care of snow removal and de-icing agents, and how to responsibly put down those products on the street without impacting our streams too badly. So the resolution in front of you is to authorize the city manager to renew the city's membership in Rain to Rivers by executing the agreement that's attached to it. And the agreement outlines what the various member responsibilities are, and includes the budget that each member contributes $2,000 that helps Rain to Rivers match the local grants and to help fund us in our operations when we're between grant cycles. So that was quick. If you want more detail, you can follow up with me afterwards, and I can answer those questions. But if you have questions for this time, I'd be glad to take them.
Thank you, Mr. Jenskow. Is there any questions for council regarding the presentation this evening? Okay, you always have the chance to follow up. Thank you. Then on a motion by Councilmember Zhang, seconded by Councilmember Graggart, this agreement between Rain to Rivers, Western Wisconsin Incorporated, has been moved. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Emanuel.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. I'll be abstaining from this vote.
Okay. Any other further comments before we vote? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Gragert,
Aye.
Strobel,
Aye.
Weld,
Aye.
Worthman,
Aye.
Zhang,
Aye.
Beaton,
Aye.
Christopherson.
Aye.
And that item passes. I'd like to just briefly recognize City Manager Peters.
Thank you, Acting Council President Worthman. Mr. Jenskow, could I try to stand up for just a second? This may be John's last presentation, I don't know, but it's certainly his last presentation to you as a council on the Rain to Rivers program, because he will be retiring at the very first part of February. So there might be another council, but we know that this is the last one, and for this. Yes. But John has been very passionate and personal about engaging us in this Rain to Rivers program. I mean, it's a very personal program for him. And of course, it's designed to protect our riverways and our waterways. In addition to working with that for the last decade for us, he's also been the point person that has taken what we learned from the 2000 storm event and really helped make the city more resilient to large rainfall events with all of the work that he's done with our stormwater capturing and design work. And so, John, just wanted to personally thank you for, and have the council also recognize your work in protecting our waterways and also protecting the city's infrastructure to large rain events. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for those words, City Manager Peters. We're going to move to our next item on our agenda this evening. This is our work plans. We have two of them. First up is item number 19. This is a resolution approving the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee's 2019 annual work plan. This evening, we're going to have Pat Ivory with the presentation. Good evening.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The ordinance for the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which we refer to as BPAC, requires City Council approval of their annual work program. A copy of the work program was included in your agenda packet. Leah Ness from the Engineering Department and myself drafted the work program, and then we presented it to BPAC at their December meeting. We also included a copy of BPAC's year-end summary of activities for 2018 in your agenda packet. I just wanted to highlight a couple of those items that they worked on during 2018. First of all, in terms of a major project, we worked on the adoption of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. That replaced a plan that was prepared back in 2010. And that was an effort that staff and BPAC worked on for about 18 months in terms of working on getting citizen input and putting the maps together and those types of things. So that was a major accomplishment for the committee. A number of the recommendations that are in the work program for this year come out of that plan that was just recently adopted. The committee also worked with the West Central Regional Planning Commission on the adoption of a update of the Safe Routes to School plan for the Eau Claire schools. That original plan was done in the early 2000s, and the West Central Regional Planning Commission updated that last year. BPAC was involved in doing some of the survey work and questionnaire work out at each of the individual schools to determine what the bicycling and the walking numbers were for the students going into those different schools. BPAC also has been involved working with engineering on providing comments on the 2018 street projects that were done this past year. Then they were also very involved with the Bike to Work, the Bike Week events that occurred back in May. One of those was a booth that they held with the opening ceremony or activity for Bike Week. Then we also co-sponsored with the Chippewa Valley Museum on a bike ride, and actually working with Councilman Gregert and myself, we hosted a bike ride that featured the historic bridges within the city of Eau Claire, and we had about 60 people that participated in that bike ride. And then lastly, a number of the BPAC members participate in the bike valet program for parking at Thursday nights concerts over at Phoenix Park, and they've been doing that for a number of years. And the numbers have continued to increase in terms of the number of people that park their bike there, and that's all volunteer efforts for both BPAC and a number of other people within the community. In terms of the 2019 program, the program provides a variety of activities and projects that should keep the committee and staff fairly busy for this particular year. I have a couple examples of some of the things that are in that program here, if we can get that to focus. First of all would be the preparation of application for the bicycle-friendly community designation through the American League of Bicyclists. This is something that the city prepared an initial application back in 2011, and we received bronze status. And then we renewed that application in 2015 and again received bronze status. The timing for that is that we're now required to submit a new or a renewed application for that in 2019, and the committee hopes that we'll be able to raise our status from bronze to silver as part of that application. The committee also will be working with West Central Regional Planning Commission on a new program called the Safe Routes to Parks. West Central will be applying for a grant application, and then if that grant is approved, they would be doing a program similar to the Safe Routes to School program, where they'll be looking at providing and making sure that there's safe and equitable routes to all from our neighborhoods to our park areas. And the involvement of BPAC at that point will really be determined by the staff of West Central in terms of how they feel there'd be some need for volunteers to provide some of the background information for that plan. Also, the committee will provide some input on the development of a complete streets policy. That's one of the recommendations within the updated bike and ped plan. Also, there was a group of 5 individuals that attended a walkability workshop in Atlanta, in Georgia last summer. Councilman Member Weld attended that particular workshop, and those 5 members, as when they came back, one of the key recommendations that they were looking at is the preparation of a complete streets policy that would be eventually presented to council for consideration. So BPAC will be involved with that also. And then also the committee will be involved with the bicycle share program. Staff is currently working on preparing a draft ordinance that would be looking at licensing vendors for bike share within the city of Eau Claire. BPAC's involvement would be to encourage vendors to come into Eau Claire if that ordinance is adopted, and also encouraging people to use that particular program once it becomes up and running. And then finally, the committee will continue to be involved in a number of ongoing projects that have done over the past few years, such as the input on the street projects that the council will be looking at over the next couple months. Also, the bike valet project at Phoenix Park, they'll continue to be involved in that, and then Bike Week activities that would be occurring in May and June. So with that, we do have a resolution in your packet. That resolution would consider adoption of that work program for BPAC.
Thank you, Mr. Ivory. Council members have questions on the presentation this evening? Councilmember Gregert.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman, and thank you, Mr. Ivory, and our engineering and planning staff who've been working with BPAC. It's really an impressive list of accomplishments, but also an ambitious agenda for the next year here. I had a few questions. I guess the first one is this decision to move with regard to the bicycle share program toward an ordinance. Do you think you could explain that a bit in terms of how BPAC came to that conclusion and staff came to that conclusion, as well as a little bit more specifically about what that timeline looks like over the next month or two in terms of seeing an ordinance in front of council?
The city attorney's office has been drafting an ordinance for the bike share that would provide a system essentially where a bike share vendor would be licensed by the city in order to operate within the city. We're still fine-tuning the wording on that. We anticipate bringing a draft of that to BPAC at their next meeting, and then also working with the university on that wording also. We did meet with a representative from the University Senate about a week and a half ago, discuss kind of the general provisions of what we're looking at for the ordinance. They seem pretty comfortable with what we're looking at this point in time. The next thing we'll be doing is sending this draft out to some potential bicycle share vendors just to make sure that we're kind of on the right track with the wording that we have. Based on the wording, based on the feedback that we get back from those vendors, then we would finalize the draft and be bringing that to council for consideration. We anticipate having that sometime in February or March. I guess our goal is to have this up and running so that the bike share vendors could start operating late spring, early summer.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Follow-up?
Sure, it's on another aspect of the plan, but I guess this item is among the new and or potential projects. It's number 3. I'm excited to see this on here. It's the discuss downtown and special events bicycle rack policies, and in the fine print it talks about special event parking and kind of hashing that out in terms of how we can accommodate alternative transportation such as bicycling to special events, as we often have some parking constraints for bicyclists as well as drivers. So I guess I was wondering, there's the identified partners section where the bid districts and DECI and transportation engineer are listed. Is there a way for us to include like a broad array of event planners into this that in a convenient way? I'm not sure if there is a event planning committee of some sort, but I guess that's my question is, how do you think we could involve event planners in decision on bicycle parking for special events?
Well, I think one way we could do that is when BPAC has their discussion on this, or discussions, it might be over a course of a couple of meetings, is we could invite in different organizations or parties that might be involved with that, such as Visit Eau Claire and some of those organizations. So that might be one way to try to get some of that input.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Further questions from council regarding the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee's proposed 2019 work plan? Further questions? Thank you, Mr. Avery. Then on a motion by Councilmember Christopherson, seconded by Councilmember Strobel, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee's plan, item number 19 has been moved. Is there a discussion on this item? Amendments? Anything else? See none. Then clerk, please call the roll on this item.
Councilmember Strobel?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Worthman?
Aye.
Zhang?
Aye.
Beaton?
Aye.
Christopherson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Aye. Gregert?
Aye.
And that passes. We move then to item 20, which is a resolution approving the Sustainability Advisory Committee's 2019 annual work plan. This evening, we are joined by Mr. Ned Noel.
Okay, good evening, City Council, or afternoon. Here also to present a work program for another advisory committee, the Sustainability Committee. And this work program also has been prepared together with staff and the committee and also the city manager's input on this. This plan, just to review last year's plan, the highlights, City Council directed in 2017 a special report to look at how the city would compare it to try to meet the Paris Agreement. And so that was given to you end of 2017. And in March of 2018, City Council adopted these ambitious goals of carbon neutrality and 100% renewable energy by 2050. So that's a major accomplishment in terms of setting these goals, the second city in the state to actually set these precedents. Along with that, we have to understand what our carbon emissions are. And so staff has been working at quantifying all the emissions in terms of transportation sector, building sector, so on and so forth. We can show today that we have, for the community, a total reduction from our baseline. As you remember, you set a baseline emission goal from 2015. Looking at 2017 data, we have a drop of about 4%. Your goal is 5% by 2020, and so we're well on that way. Probably a lot of credit goes to Xcel Energy as they clean their grid with more wind power. So we can show that today that we are moving towards that goal, or that interim goal. So success there. End of the year update, moving on. Staff and the committee submitted a large grant package to the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin for $180,000 to look at more planning around meeting these goals. And so we'll talk about that in the work program next slide. And then also we've been working really strategically with Xcel Energy because they are providing more and more wind and clean energy on the grid. Right now, about 30% you can actually take credit for on the grid at your house or your business. And so we see that strategically, in order to advance these goals, we have to work with our partners. And Xcel Energy is really one of those key entities to do that. And they're very excited to work with the City of Eau Claire in order to make this happen. If you have not been following, they committed corporately to a 2050 goal of carbon neutrality as well, corporate-wide, so that covers our state and our city. And one of the reasons why they set this goal, among many reasons, is because communities like Denver, like Minneapolis, like Eau Claire have actually set these goals forward. So the policies that you have set have talked to or communicated to the utilities about what's important for your values. Moving on. The committee also promoted electric vehicle education event, where a kind of a ride and drive learning event that Xcel Energy again hosted, which was well attended. Several staff people attended along with our fleet manager to learn more about electric vehicles. Xcel Energy is also supporting more of a suitability assessment for electric vehicles. Right now, looking at 20 of our fleet vehicles to see how we can transition them in a cost-effective way to more electrification. And then also, for the third year running, Acting City Council President Andrew Worthman issued out, on behalf of the committee, Sustainability Community Awards to 9 winners, and including our own Jeff Pippinger received an award for his outstanding work for the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. So those awards just really showcase what people are doing in the community, as well as Xcel Energy received that award and several other community members, businesses, and residents. So that's a little bit of highlights for what we accomplished the committee last year. Moving on to the work program for this year. As I had mentioned, the Public Service Commission grant was noted as an outstanding application for the city, and we were able to secure that money to do a plan that will work strategically with Xcel Energy and their consultants to develop how are we going to actually meet these 2050 goals of carbon neutrality and renewable energy that are very ambitious and very challenging to do. But again, working with Xcel, we'll be able to do that in a plan in terms of how, looking at different scenarios and cost strategies of how to get there over time. And then also we were selected by the Midwest Renewable Energy Association by submitting an application to run a solar group buy for the metro area. And so we'd like to work with If you approve this work program with Altoona and Chippewa Falls to aggregate interested people, mostly residents, to, if they're interested in putting solar on their rooftop or on their property, to aggregate that purchasing power to reduce the cost of those solar panels so that we can implement more clean energy on properties within the city. Another project that we'll be working at that's funded with the Public Service Commission grant is a net zero energy construction building development guide. And this is outlining with the development sector, with builders, how we can actually look at construction practices to make them more energy efficient, homes that are incorporating more renewable energy. And so working with that sector will be important, again, to try to implement these goals that have been set. Additionally, we're going to look at advancing electric vehicle planning, not only on the fleet side of things, but also for charging stations. City Council did approve capital improvement funding for 6 chargers at the Galloway parking ramp. So looking strategically where else within the community that we can have more public charging stations. Again, working with Xcel Energy on that planning. And then also just to note that we have several ongoing projects, our annual sustainability report that captures what we're doing as a city, whether it's rain to rivers type projects or clean energy developments. Greenhouse gas inventories, as we continue to track our progress with that, takes a lot of work. And then the community awards have been a valued program that showcases what others are doing in the community to show that it takes a whole community to meet these goals. So with that, you have a resolution to adopt the work program for the Sustainability Committee. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Noel. Councilmember Beaton.
Thank you. First, I want to say thanks, Mr. Noel. It seems that every time you come before us, I'm a little bit more impressed and really proud of what our city is doing, especially with the clean energy goals. Since we passed them, I've been able to learn about what people and cities are doing across the country, and it really seems that we're blazing a trail here in Eau Claire, especially for cities our size. So I really appreciate you taking that on. I'm really excited to hear about the Clean Energy Action Plan and our grant that we got through the Public Service Commission, and wondering if we're going to be. It's still a little vague to me how we're going to be running that program, if we're going to be hiring a consultant or if we're going to be doing it internally, and then how the public engagement will be conducted.
Yeah, right now the grant is on hold with the government shutdown. So the dollars with the Department of Energy that float down to the state to then the local governments and the school districts, we've been placed on hold because the Department of Energy has furloughs and things like that. So unfortunately, we've been in hold for about 3 months. So hopefully we'll get some good news soon to be able to begin this project. The state is willing to work with us. They've already told us we don't have to report for last quarter's work because we didn't do any work. Mm-hmm. So really, once we get the green light to go on the grant and the project, it's engaging with Xcel Energy. They do this with other communities under a program called Partners in Energy. And through that process, it's a community, a stakeholder process that mirrors similar to what we do with our comprehensive planning process. So if you were a part of the 2015 update to the comp plan, or a part of the health chapter update or the sustainability chapter update, it would mirror more like that with a steering committee that would have the voices of the community that we would invite and hopefully get a good turnout of maybe 40 people on that committee to walk through the process of, here are the goals, here are the different implementation practices that we might have, and how are we going to get there together, and lay out those strategies in implementation section that we would execute going after the plan is adopted by council. Okay. So if that gives you a better picture of the process. Yeah. So we would hopefully be wrapped up with this by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councilmember Greiger?
Thank you, President Worthman, and thank you, Mr. Noel. I had a question. One dynamic that I think is positive that is changing perhaps the work plan, and maybe you could give me some insight into that, is Xcel Energy's carbon-free energy goal for 2050. Could you maybe explain what that goal is that's been set by Xcel across their service territory, as well as how that may change, the way we plan for the Renewable Energy Action Plan versus when we wrote the grant, since it only happened in December, is my understanding that they made that announcement.
Yeah, it's fairly recent, so I think people are trying to understand what that might look like, but the utility can best speak to their plans of how they're doing that. They're filing right now an integrated resource plan, which is basically their comprehensive plan for energy delivery. So within that, they'll explain how they're going to deliver more clean energy, but you can expect more wind power, more solar, and then that translates more into on-the-ground projects. And hopefully within 5 years, we'll have more projects here in Wisconsin that Xcel actually creates. So with that, they also are launching a new Renewables Connect rate, which was just approved by the PSC, which would be a premium type rate that would be about 60 cents per 100 kilowatt hour block that you as a homeowner or business could subscribe to. So that would be something that if you want to go further, faster, you can subscribe to, and something that the city could look at, something that a homeowner or business could look at that would be available very, very soon. So there's kind of two different strategies that they have is the grid, what's given by generation that they either buy or generate themselves, or with the rates that the customers can go further, faster that way. If that answers your question.
You think I could have a follow-up question?
Sure.
To that? So Xcel, how close is their commitment to ours across their service territory? And I think it's 100% carbon-free, but ours is 100% renewable.
Yes.
What is the difference there?
There's
exactly?
major differences. So carbon-free, that is going to be. It may still include fossil fuels. So that might have natural gas, but what they're going to have to do is look at sequestration technologies. So how do you pump the carbon down into the ground? So that's one option. They say by 2040, they can meet 80% of carbon-free energy, but the last 20%, it's either too costly or the technology is not there. So banking on that in time, they'll have that technology there. So the carbon-free is very different than the goal that you set with the renewable energy. Well, they're the same in the sense of carbon-free is the same, but with the renewable energy, that would not include, natural gas. That would not include nuclear. So right now they provide 30% nuclear to customers. So there's some big differences there that we'll have to tease out in the Renewable Energy Action Plan. Because we're different than what they would provide to the base customers.
For explaining that.
Further questions from council on this plan? Actually, I had one. I'm glad to see the organic waste stream diversion is on here. And this is something that I know you've worked on in the past to do with construction materials and things like that. But in here, it specifically talks about the waste haulers and you see it in other cities, but essentially encouraging waste haulers to start taking organics as well for composting. I guess my question is could we add in something here about modifying our waste hauler? I believe it's the waste stream ordinance. Not entirely sure what the name of it is, but to include community composting, because that's something that I know the DNR permits, but we specifically don't allow smaller scale composting in our community. And I wonder if we could add that into this overall part of the plan.
Yeah, so that would require an ordinance change to Chapter 8, the Waste Management section, which does not allow the transportation to different sites of compost material, as you well know. So that you would, if that's something that you want to pursue, you'd have to amend the work program to look at us working with the health department to consider changes with that. The strategy that's outlined there is to look at with advanced disposals, petition to enlarge the landfill is where composting can reduce the actual amount of material going into the landfill, is to have some discussions with them to see if they would be willing to start changing practices like one of the haulers currently does, who does pick up compost curbside. There are 2 organic landfills already, compost landfills that exist for infrastructure. So that is why the committee is looking at these strategies to try to reduce this waste stream, which is about 25% of a landfill.
25% of a landfill is organic.
Of the waste stream.
I think I am interested in adding something in here to look at. I mean, it would simply be an amendment to this plan, but to do with if the ordinance is being looked at already, maybe there's an opportunity to include community composting.
Yeah, one other note on that is we don't have in the work program to do an ordinance. It's more to work with the haulers to have discussions. So
okay. Eventually, it would come into an ordinance change, though, I believe.
That was the thought, that eventually, if they agreed, that we would get there. But it was more to have discussions with them to learn where they're at with their operations, to see if they would be able to accommodate this volume of material. Just to give you background with where the committee was thinking.
Do you think it would fit in with the committee's work plan if we added, maybe it's not as direct, but some language that says like explore opportunities, to amend the ordinance around community composting in that section?
Community composting. Yeah, I mean, it's really up to council on what you prefer to do on that. I think if I don't have the work program right in front of me, but this is an item that we had thought that might take about 2 years.
Okay.
So, those early discussions, talking with the haulers and then moving towards that. But on the community side of composting, we hadn't really envisioned that side. So if that's something that you want to add, it would have to be noted in the work program for us to look at that.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Emanuel.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. I think the idea is worth exploring. I remember a handful of years ago, we won't go into the great details, but I learned that one couldn't move one pile of leaves to another place with a pile of leaves, and that was against city ordinance. And so learned about some of the reasons and the rationale why that might not be safe and could pose some public health risks. And so that was a learning opportunity for me. And yet it's almost one of those things when it's come up, it's like, oh man, that's where people like to jab at government of like making up more rules and you just can't move leaves. So I'm just wondering, maybe the manager could help advise us, because I really would be interested in learning about this, and yet it seems like 2 years might be quite a long time. And if the advisory committee hadn't planned on this, maybe there's another way council could learn about this, because essentially what we need is an ordinance change. And maybe we'll learn something, we'll say, well, that's terrible, let's never change the ordinance, I don't know. But is there maybe another mechanism that you could suggest, whether that's maybe like not a work session, but forget what we call it on Monday nights when we learn about an item, not really for action, but just to learn. Study session. Yeah, study session.
Yeah, City Manager Peters, sorry.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. Certainly we could do a study session around that issue. The other option, which I think is maybe being teased out here, is you could add to the work plan. I do like the language, explore feasibility. I mean, so it's not a mandate to have to, but basically explore feasibilities, the feasibility and possibilities related to community composting or something. And so I mean, you could add that to the work plan, and that's something that then they would do, and then a year from now you'd hear a report on kind of what they found or didn't find with that.
Okay.
So, but you could also do a study session too. I mean, if you're just interested in kind of learning more about it, we could do it that way also. So either way.
Councilmember Emanuel.
Thank you, Acting President Orthman, and thank you, City Manager. If I can refresh my memory about advisory committees, am I correct in my memory that there's a report that comes at a 6-month-ish mark before council, like a progress report, or are we only going to hear back in 1 year?
If you would like, you may. The ordinance just says end of year progress report.
Any further questions on the work plan as presented this evening? I don't see any. Thank you, Mr. Noel. Then we will move this item on a motion by Councilmember Emanuel and seconded by Councilmember Weld. The work plan for Sustainability Advisory Committee. And I think, I'll just speak first on this. I would like to amend and add the language that the city manager had specified. And just a tiny bit of background on it. The way I understand, waste, all of our waste in our community, is something that it's all a part of what we have to consider. And organic waste is, as Mr. Noel had said, makes up about 25%. I've heard sometimes as high as 40% of what goes into our landfill. So with the opportunity to figure out how to keep it from going in our landfill is worthwhile. And on top of it, the DNR actually sort of, if I remember correctly, through state statute, focuses on sort of commercial-sized organics, smaller community-sized piles that you might see at at a city dump site or something like that, and then smaller backyard composting. And to date, if a garden or a faith organization or a business would like to set up sort of a smaller collection site for composting, that is not currently allowed by our city ordinance. You can do backyard, and we have licensed haulers that do the large scale, but we don't have that intermediate. And I've always thought that that could be another possible opportunity to do a neighborhood compost or something like that. And so I'd appreciate if the commission itself, the committee itself, would look at whether it's possible to amend our ordinances and language to potentially allow for that. And if it's not, then we would know back. So I would like to make that a motion to amend the work plan on that item. Is there a second on that? Seconded by Councilmember Beaton. Okay. Should I recognize you? City Manager Peters?
If I could, to maybe be a little more specific a bit, and I don't know if this captures exactly what you're thinking of, but if I'm listening to this, I would think that language, explore feasibility and options for community composting programs. I don't know if that captures what you were thinking.
Yeah, that sounds good. Councilmember Beaton, does that sound okay? The motion on the table to amend the plan. Any further discussion from council on this item? I don't see any. I think we'll take a vote then. Clerk, please call the roll.
For the amendment?
Yeah, for the amendment. Adding the language that City Manager Peters just relayed.
Councilmember Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Beaton.
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
Emmanuel. Aye. Gregert.
Aye.
Strobel.
Aye.
And that passes. Do council members have any other amendments or just a conversation or discussion around this work plan? I'll just give a little historic. We've had these work plans come forward, and usually they're just minor tweaks, and most often than not, we've passed them as is. And I think it's been a fairly smooth process, working with a work plan. So, do council members have any comments or ideas or thanks they would like to offer to the committee? Seeing no discussion at this time, I'll say again, thank you, Mr. Noel, for all the work. As Councilmember Beaton had said, it seems like every year there's success to be seen, and our community is making great strides. And I'm especially excited by Xcel Energy's bold action that they've shown on this issue, and the role that we play as a community in helping to push that conversation forward as representatives. So thank you for all of your work on this and for the committee's work. Seeing no further discussion on the work plan itself, item number 20 in our packets. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Beaton.
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
Emmanuel. Aye. Greigert.
Aye.
Strobel.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
And that passes. We move to item 21. This is a resolution joining the Global Covenant of Mayors on Climate Energy. Mr. Noel.
Okay. This item, as you just approved, the work program is listed in the Sustainability Committee's work program. It was also last year. We are now poised to be able to consider joining this organization, mainly because we have these goals that have been set, these 2050 goals. We have tracked our carbon emissions, and we have now funded a climate action plan or a renewable energy action plan for this year. Those are really the three requirements that you need to do within 3 years of after joining. So we're already 2 out of 3 on our way towards meeting those goals. Really, what is this collective? It's looking to pair up like-minded cities that have these goals, these ambitions to try to meet the Paris Agreement on a city-type level, whether their nations support it or not. And so by pooling the collective action, they can quantify those emissions reduced, whether it's a large city or a small city like Eau Claire. One other important tool is, as the advances continue on how to track carbon emissions, the different scope of emissions and things like that, this provides kind of a clearinghouse, a standardization of how to track greenhouse gas or carbon equivalencies. And, so that is important to look at this from a global point of view rather than just a localized point of view. So there is a platform called Carbon that actually quantifies these emissions. The current software that we use, the city actually pairs and syncs nicely with the Carbon platform, so there is no change or extra work that the city staff has to do when it comes to quantifying and tracking emissions. Another great opportunity with this is to look at how we share knowledge with the collective. What are you doing, New York City? What are you doing, Madison, on how to tackle these goals as well? So there's a lot of resources that the covenant provides for cities. And as I mentioned, the goals and inventories and the mitigation and adaptation plans, we're already well on our way with that. Even though that the covenant talks about mayors, you don't need a mayor to join this. It really just requires city council action or city manager type commitment. And there is no fee to join. Again, really all it requires for staff is just to upload our emission inventory, which we already have in our software that syncs into this Carbon platform. So again, no fee, no mayor required. Just if you want to join this, city council action to pass the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Noel. Are there questions from council on the presentation or on the resolution? Council Member Strobel.
No fees to join. It's pretty much, it sounds like it's an online type of situation. So you don't see any ongoing costs or future costs for staff at all. And what happens if within 3 years you're not doing what you're supposed to do? Do you get kicked out or fined or what?
Right. So the city, it's a voluntary type thing, so we could always just stop being involved. If things change. If for some reason we don't develop a climate action plan within 3 years, again, we would just deactivate. So in terms of staff time, we looked at a lot of what this requires. And like I said, there's basically a synchronization of our carbon platform that just uploads into their system. And so all you have to do is set up the community's ID and then upload your inventories on an annual or biannual, or how often you want to do it as a community basis for the emissions. So not a lot of staff work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Council Member Greigert.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman, and thank you again, Mr. Noel, for the way that you've networked around the world now to help make sure Eau Claire is a leader on these issues. So I appreciate it. I was looking on the website for the Global Covenant, and it looks like the vast majority of the cities are in Europe, and it's starting to become something that cities in the United States are gravitating toward as well in recent times. So do you happen to know, I see a few dots in Wisconsin, but not many. Do you know any other cities in Wisconsin that are members of this?
Yeah, I believe it's Janesville and Wisconsin Rapids. And if you look at their upload of what they are pledging towards, it's really hard to get the details of that. So I don't really know. I know that they haven't passed these ambitious goals. I pretty much know that they don't have climate action plans. So I don't know if they're upholding their commitments or not, but they're on the map.
And it takes 3 years to, they have 3 years to fulfill the goals, is that correct? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further questions on this item? Mr. Noel? Then this will be on a motion, moved on a motion by Councilmember Beaton and seconded by Councilmember Zhang. Is there discussion on this item? Just want to say thank you to Mr. Noel, the committee as well. I saw that on the website, it's in our packet too, that over 9,000 communities worldwide, representing over 780 million people, have joined this and are part of this. And I think this is a good way for us to sort of engage with other communities that are forward thinking and how we look at climate and energy issues. So just thank you for the work on this and the committee as well. Seeing no further discussion at this time, item number 21, which is a Global Covenant of Mayors item. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Zhang?
Aye.
Beaton?
Aye.
Christopherson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Aye. Greigert?
Aye.
Strobel?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Worthman?
Aye, and that item passes unanimously. We move then to our ordinances for introduction. This evening, ordinance number 22, zoning. It's an ordinance rezoning properties located at 708, 718, and 720 South Farwell Street, 316 Emery Street, and 707, 709, and 715 South Barstow Street from CBD to CBDP, and to approve the general development plan for a mixed-use building that includes apartments, commercial space, and memory care facility with a reduced setback. This is in planning file Z163719. That's our first ordinance for action. Is there a wish by council to suspend the rules at this time and bring up this item? Seeing no desire, we will then move to our second ordinance for introduction. This is ordinance 23 listed, rezoning property located at 318 Elm Street from I2 to RM. This is on planning file Z163819. Is there a wish from council this evening to suspend the rules and take up ordinance for introduction number 23? I see no such desire. We move then to item 24. This is again an ordinance for introduction. Rezoning property located at the west side of Oxford Avenue. This is between Maxon Street and Cammon Street from I1 to CBDP, and to approve a general development plan for apartments with a reduced setback. This is in file Z163919. Is there any wish from council this evening to take up this item for action? I see no desire. And then we will move to our announcements this evening from City Manager and City Council. City Manager Peters.
Thank you, Acting President Worthman. Just a few announcements tonight. Following this meeting, we will have a work session to start our street reconstruction season. So Mr. Solberg has a nice presentation to outline where we're going and the proposals for street projects that we have upcoming this year. And then tomorrow morning, hopefully most of you are able to join us at 7:30 at Hobbs for the volunteer breakfast. This is where we step back and the appointments committee has organized and provides a recognition for the well over 100 volunteers that step up and help make our boards and commissions work for us within the city of Eau Claire. And then Friday the 18th is the Eggs and Issues for the state of the county. And then Wednesday the 30th is the Chippewa Valley Rally. And if you've not participated in that, that's an opportunity to participate in a program that the Chamber puts on, where we go down to Madison and meet with legislators to talk about issues of local concern and interest. And then on Thursday, the 7th of February, is the Joint Cities meeting up in Bloomer. But it also, we just learned today, has a conflict with the Chamber's forum for the at-large candidates. So you will have things to choose from on February 7th. The Joint Cities meeting up in Bloomer or the at-large forum. So those are the announcements that I have tonight for you.
Thank you, City Manager Peters. Are there any announcements from council at this time? I'm seeing no desire for announcements from council. We will, on a motion by Councilmember Graggart, seconded by Councilmember Christopherson, by unanimous consent, seeing no objection, adjourn this meeting at 5:13.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689. Or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.